Somebody, I think, was jumping from a bridge and Vivekananda could see it from a distance, and he had the power, the hypnotic power, to stop him doing it. I think Vivekananda was very disorientated by his first experience with Ramakrishna. Vivekananda obviously had a role to play that Ramakrishna could see, and obviously the karma to do it. It is said that he chose Swami Vivekananda, that he approached him before his birth to help him with this mission. And Vivekananda you could describe as his star pupil quite often with the New Age movement and the mind-body-spirit movement. People turn against the intellect. And that's why it's very good to remind us of the great Vivekananda, because he used his intellect. He applied his intellect brilliantly. We can have our visions, our intuitions, our various experiences, but we need to use the intellect. I think the important thing, it needs to be directed from...
Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Bull, and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, to unlock your psychic powers, and to discover true spirituality. In today's show, we look at the life of a spiritual giant, Swami Vivekananda, who exemplified the qualities of bravery, of will, and of the power of the intellect on the spiritual path. What can you do to stand up for truth, to become spiritually strong, and to apply your intellect to help you in your search for God realization? And thanks for subscribing for more episodes exploring the lives of these spiritual giants and their timeless spiritual example for us all.
Richard.
Darren.
So let me start with a short story to set the scene today.
Please do.
He stands alone, a young monk in saffron robes, no title, no institution, no worldly power, just a burning presence and eyes of the glimpse of the eternal. All around him the great hall rustles with expectation. Scholars, bishops, politicians, philosophers, the gatekeepers of religion, the authorities of truth, all stare uncertain, curious. He bows, he breathes, he speaks. Sisters and brothers of America. The hall explodes into a standing ovation in awe at the mighty presence of Swami Vivekananda. With only the hard-earned credentials of his spiritual attainments, he speaks directly to the soul of humanity, to the essential universal truths, to a vision of religious unity under the banner of glorious all-encompassing divinity. To remain silent would be a betrayal of the light, and so with a fearless love, he speaks the unshakable truths, to plant the seeds of God realization in the West as a servant of the divine. So today we walk side by side with Swami Vivekananda, and we remember, I think, that when truth rises on the wings of courage, the people listen.
Well, very good, lovely, beautiful, and very, very close to my heart. It's actually where I started. Like the day before I found the Aetherius Society, I came across this book. This is the actual book.
Amazing, the actual book.
Yeah, and this is the early 70s at Hull University. I read the book. I thought, this is me. And it contains the aphorisms of Patanjali with Swami Vivekananda's commentaries. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And then, as I've said before, I found the Aetherius Society on virtually the next day, courtesy of John Holder. And I knew it was greater. You know, it had a greater purpose.
I see.
It was more important, world service. But I never lost it. I've still got the book, and I've discovered the thing I wanted from it, which was samadhi, even in those days, can be attained in a different way, but it's still the same thing. I think Dr. King once said that in the New Age, everybody will practice the aphorisms of Patanjali because they are useful. I actually had a conversation with Dr. King once about this, and he said to me that this is why Patanjali was to give, because he was an avatar, to give the aphorisms. And he said it as though they existed already. That's how it just came over to me anyway. He came to give them. But like all the great yogis, especially in the Raja Yoga field, Swami Vivekananda turned back to him. And of course, Swami Vivekananda made a point of making the ancient yoga wisdom, as you described there, accessible in the West. He's really the first one. He was the pioneer, well ahead of Yogananda and Sri Aurobindo and others. He came over right there. It was, I think, 1893. I think.
Yeah, that was the Parliament of World Religions there. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I think he's an amazing example of. We talked a little bit earlier of willpower. And
willpower's what I get from him. Something Dr. King once says: "You can do anything you determine," and that's, I think, encapsulated in Swami Vivekananda's approach. This great will that he had. He had tremendous will. I mean, he could actually, and on one occasion, there was somebody, I think I'll get the story right, was going to commit suicide. I think jumping from a bridge or a high spot anyway, and Vivekananda could see it from a distance, and he had the power, the hypnotic power, to stop him doing it.
Wow.
And I believe he used it, but he never wanted to use it again. I think that's right, that story. He had tremendous powers.
And what would you say about, one other quality that comes to mind with Vivekananda is certainly his discernment?
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Viveka means discrimination.
Okay, it's in the name then.
It says bliss through discrimination,
Okay.
yeah. And he had a very, very fine intellect. He was a very clever person. He was a very brave person. But I think it's a good lesson for us all. He used his intelligence. I mean, he applied it to Ramakrishna. I think it was said he was like the only disciple who was actually allowed to argue at times with Ramakrishna, who was his guru, and Ramakrishna himself being an avatar. It is said that he chose Swami Vivekananda, that he approached him before his birth.
Before Vivekananda was even born?
It is said that he did, yeah, to help him with this mission.
Wow.
And Vivekananda you could describe as his star pupil, really.
Yeah. Okay.
He's the one that he sent out. There were others, but Vivekananda really stands tall among them. He was the leader of them. I think it's interesting that he's said to have spoken up with Ramakrishna quite a lot, and he was allowed to do so because that's something that I was told by Dr. King, and on one occasion even by a cosmic source through Dr. King, to actually do at times. And it's so from my experience, I'm not for 1 minute comparing myself to Swami Vivekananda. I'm nowhere near that level. But it's a very difficult thing to do, especially with such a great master as Dr. George King. But I can sort of relate to that in that regard and see that it's a difficult thing to get right.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you can relate directly to that role.
There's a very, very moving account when Ramakrishna was dying. He took on himself throat cancer. He didn't have to, took karma for others by doing it, and stated that. And some of his disciples were around his bed and they were a bit frightened of it. They didn't understand the illness and they were keeping their distance a bit. And Vivekananda felt they weren't getting stuck in enough. And there's a story of him taking I think it was like a saucer or a basin in a spittoon, or which he'd had to spit out various things. And Vivekananda took it in his hand and ate the contents of it in front of them all to demonstrate to them all, this is a master and really get stuck in.
It's a shocking demonstration.
It is. And I will say, actually, that has a sort of parallel, not that demonstration, but that being one of the people, not very regularly, there were others much more regularly than I, his aides and so on, in Santa Barbara in the latter years with Dr. King, when he had an illness, he took upon himself, I think it's known, cancer as well, for karmic reasons for others. And I will say, giving him healing during that period, personally speaking, so when you give healing to someone with an ailment, you can pick up the energy, the vibration, and yet going in there to give him healing was like going into a temple, even then, with the illness.
Wow.
So that was my experience of it, at least.
And what would you, because I think what Vivekananda really brings out is the value of our intellect and our discrimination in a spiritual context. Something that tends to be thrown out, or ignored.
I think the important thing, it needs to be directed from the higher self. Intellect of itself, as we can see, doesn't on its own find truth. Intellect is developed.
That's our world, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually think like the number of people who are pushed into going to university. I mean, I went to university myself. When I went, 2% of Britain, I think, went, which wasn't enough. And I think now it's something like 50 or maybe more, I'm not sure. But I think people are pushed into it. And I think it's, I will say, overrated. I'm not saying don't go. I'm not saying don't study. Do. It's useful. You can learn things, and particularly depending on the course you take anyway, very valuable things. So please don't get me wrong. But the process used for the most part is not creative. I think the Master Aetherius described universities as frustration centers. And I can see why, because they frustrate higher mind.
Interesting.
They aren't tapping intuition for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't tapping creativity for the most part, depending on the course. But they do teach you a critical faculty. That's what they emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
And it's useful. And that's good. But it's not of itself enough. But what goes wrong, I think, quite often with the New Age movement and the mind-body-spirit movement is that people turn against the intellect. And that's why it's very good to remind us of the great Vivekananda, for example, because he used his intellect. He applied his intellect brilliantly to his teaching, to teaching people. Imagine arriving in America, you know, or any Western country. It wasn't the only one he went to. From his culture, with people who are very intellectually driven people, and speaking to them, and they were deeply impressed by him from the beginning. And he set a pattern which other yogis then followed of coming over here and doing it. And I think his intellect was crucial in the way he delivered the teachings, in the way he published them. I'll give you one example. In the Aphorisms of Patanjali, there's a section where Patanjali defines the 5 types of mind, which is right knowledge, indiscrimination, or some would say wrong knowledge, incorrect knowledge, sleep, memory, and a thing called vikalpa. Now, you know, when I first read this, you know, I thought that's a bit remote. You know, sleep, memory, right knowledge, wrong
What's
knowledge.
vikalpa?
Vikalpa.
What is vikalpa?
What is vikalpa? And he calls it verbal delusion. And this is his analysis. He says it's when words don't correspond to their meanings.
Well, that's prevalent, isn't it?
And, you know, when I first heard that, I thought, okay, but is it as big as sleep and memory? And but now I think, it's everywhere. It can be deliberate. It's not necessarily lying. It's where what you're saying is not what you really mean. And it goes on all the time.
Yeah, almost like unconsciously.
And people don't even know they're doing it.
So
I can see this now as one of the 5 states of mind. That's just an example. But he analyzed it so clearly. And so that intellect then came into play, this is a good example of it really, with a great teaching, which he was then able to, and we need that. We can have our visions, our intuitions, our various experiences, but we need to define them. And we need to use the intellect. The intellect, I would say, is generally cultivated in a lower chakra, very often I would say the solar plexus center. But this is an important center, it's a vital center. If it's directed by a higher center, such as the heart center, which governs intuition more and deeper perception and love, of course, and that then that's applied to the intellect. Absolutely invaluable. Don't throw it out. Don't throw out, as they used to say, terrible phrase, the baby with the bathwater. You know, keep the intellect, use the intellect. You've got to bring understanding to bear upon the wisdom you're receiving.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of surprising trait of various masters and adepts, how sharp their intellect really is.
Yeah.
And you know, if you're just, you know, your average Western intellectual, you don't want to come into a debate with a real master. I mean, you will not win.
And the master wouldn't waste time debating either, because very often, you know, in a limited way, I've experienced this. You know, you'll have an experience, somebody doesn't understand it, and they wish to debate it with you, and it's a waste of time because you can't alter it. Doesn't really matter what points are made. Yeah, it happened. It's a thing.
The truth is not the product of the debate, is it? It's already there.
Yeah. And this is the essence of Jnana Yoga, which, of course, Vivekananda was a tremendous exponent of Jnana Yoga, the yoga of wisdom. It's applied to your meditations. It's not the other way around. Yeah. And this is why in the West, and you only have to look at Western philosophy, which gets very convoluted, and pages of explanation by, you know, even some of our better known, you know, I'm no expert on it, but, you know, Locke and Kant and, you know, these Hume, and it's a very different sort of field than, say, looking at the Upanishads, for example, or the Tao Te Ching, for example, or I would say the 9 freedoms. And from the 9 freedoms flow many, many, many multitudinous thoughts. And they all go back to those very pithy, brilliant statements, second to none. I mean, if you want discrimination, you've got it, you know, that very succinct, analytical mind you've got it, I don't think, anywhere finer than in the Nine Prims or in the Mars Sector 6's. That's his whole approach and the way he teaches. And then the understanding is brought to bear, often through the commentaries or through our own understanding of it. But it's clear, it's not complex. It is complex, but it's not worded in a complicated way. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think, what I've always loved about that, and I went through this journey myself, on, just becoming more familiar with spirituality, was you start to really realize the limitation of the intellectual mind.
Yeah.
And you just start to see that, just the way that the whole world runs, so much of it is rule-based and whatnot. And we wouldn't need the rules if we just had a greater realization of God and just acted naturally out of that realization.
Yeah.
All of these codes of conduct and everything we have, they're only to make up for our shortcomings in understanding the law of karma, of understanding the oneness that is the reality of creation. And if we did have that, you don't need all of the don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that. That's just because we're so limited.
Yes, I mean, I think I paraphrase now, but there's a transmission from the Master Jesus where he talks about science without love as being a soulless wanderer in the realms of night.
Yeah.
And that's that's the untrammeled intellect.
Yes, that's a great
without
great
the love, the higher aspects of our consciousness directing it. But with the higher aspects of our consciousness, you still need understanding. You still need to come out of samadhi or a higher state of consciousness or a deep intuitive perception and use the conscious mind again. You need to leave, not completely leave, but come down, you might say, from superconscious state to a conscious state to apply the conscious mind to the world of action. But it's still directed. There is still that inner flame alive. And in a great master, they would be able, in the middle of a field of action, to look through their third eye for a moment if they needed to. They'd have that control and that advancement. I mean, a very great master, I don't know, just to throw out the name of a master, Lord Babaji, or, great intelligence, would have such control over their inner faculties, they'd use whichever aspect of mind was going to be the most useful at any given moment.
Wow, yeah, real control, isn't it? In just a tiny way, sometimes when I'm working, particularly on things for the society, I might be going for a couple of hours and I might kind of get stuck. And then I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to detach. I'm going to do my practices for a moment. And within like 5 seconds,
you're back.
It's like the answer's there. I'm
track.
Like, I'll just do that.
Yeah.
Then I think, well, why didn't I just do that 2 hours ago? You know what I mean? Like,
but, I must say discrimination is incredibly important now. I mean, we need that sort of Swami Vivekananda approach to the numerous claims that are out there.
Totally.
And a lot of them you don't even need, you could, but you don't need to use your intuition on. You can quickly discriminate just seeing their incoherence, their obvious errors, their inconsistency. You can easily, and that's where the critical mind, which I mentioned earlier, which is used and trained and encouraged in our educational system in the West, particularly, probably the world now, can be very useful. It's just not enough.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think Vivekananda was probably a great outspoken critic of many of these inconsistencies, hypocrisies, etc., that he saw in various religious systems and in society as a whole.
Yes,
and that's another example of his piercing and critical intellect operating there.
Yes, and he was encouraged to work in that way by his master, I believe. And I think you might have the reference where he stated, well, if you've got it, you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I think, this is from Ramakrishna saying, I'm referring to the deepest state, and I think specifically cosmic consciousness. I will keep that treasure locked away for now. You have much work to do in the world.
Yes, now that's a very interesting statement, isn't it? Because to say I will keep that treasure locked away tells us that it was there. If you're going to if you're going to ascend, and he did ascend, and I think he always knew, as I mentioned earlier, he wouldn't live to the age of 40, and he didn't. He came back to ascend as well as perform a mission, to do both those things. And obviously there were, I would think, things he had to transmute, dot I's, cross T's, because everything has to be right if you're going to ascend. There can't be any blemish at all in your conduct that you haven't put right. There will be blemishes, yes, but you've put them right.
Yeah.
But there, if you're going to ascend, it means you must have entered cosmic consciousness in former lives, or you wouldn't be about to ascend. You'll come back to control it. And clearly Ramakrishna, his master and avatar in his own right, could see he didn't need it at that point, or he would have let him have it. He didn't need it. And it's interesting, that he didn't want, I think, my understanding of it is him to get sort of carried away with it and, want to stay in it, which would be very, in the culture that they were in an ashram in India, a thing that people would do if they ever got near that state. They wouldn't probably get near that state, but they get to a state and want to stay in it. He didn't want that. But it also tells us he wanted Vivekananda to develop this inquiring mind, this intellect, to apply his intelligence and his ability to teaching, to taking the message.
Yes.
Not just the Ramakrishna message, actually.
Yeah.
The message of the Indian teachings to the West.
One aspect that we haven't necessarily spoken about too much yet is his bravery as well in doing so.
Yeah.
In undertaking to do this mission and in carrying this truth around the world.
Yeah.
And we can see it in every aspect, even in our own lives, for anyone on the spiritual path, to be able to share uncomfortable truths that probably will cost you in almost all ways.
Oh, yeah. And you get knocked down, because there's a lot of people who have spiritual beliefs and they won't tell anybody. I mean, I've even given lectures, even on the subject of UFOs in the past, and had people in the audience, when I revealed some facts, stand up and say, yeah, well, I had a sighting 20 years ago, and they're sitting next to their wife, and the wife said, well, you never told me. She speaks up in the audience, you never told me.
Yeah.
And he hasn't even told his family till that moment. People are embarrassed or whatever it is. It's pretty, actually there's an interesting story which is relevant to this about Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's master.
Oh, yeah.
Where he had two students, and obviously there was a lot of bad talk against this ashram, which it means it must have been good, because there will be bad talk if it's important at all. And I for one, and possibly I'm sure you have, but I've had having done the media a lot, my real fair share of attacks on our teachings and on Dr. King and on our beliefs and so forth. You get it. You're going to get it. So one of his students went out to, I think it was a marketplace, and heard Ramakrishna being traduced, his name criticized, people pointing at him, and he defended Ramakrishna vehemently and got into a big argument and stood his ground and came back to the ashram, reported to Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna said, well, you should have kept calm and kept balanced and, I don't know the exact words, not overreacted and just detached, because it doesn't matter at all and you shouldn't have reacted like that. Another student heard this, and sometime after, I think they were on a ferry ride, and the same thing happened to them. Oh, you're from that ashram, there's a lot of nonsense, it's a da-da-da. And so he remembered these words of Ramakrishna. He didn't react. He kept very calm, came back, told Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna said, you should have defended me to the hilt. Whatever it took, you should have. Okay. And this was apparently one of the traits of Ramakrishna. There's a kind of a yin and a yang there, but there's a sort of balanced lesson, but different lessons for each student.
I mean, it's just interesting that, it's what that student needs, isn't it, in their development? That's what it sounds like to me. It's not just like one rule. No. I think that also speaks to the point we were making earlier. All these rules and stuff. It's when one thing doesn't apply necessarily in the same way to the next person and what they need in their evolution, the traits that they need to develop and bring out. It may have been that in the first case, or whichever way around they were, that person needed to develop a more calm disposition and more composure in dealing with certain situations. So that's what he encouraged. But the other person, for them to do that would have been too much of a passive approach. Maybe it would be. And he wanted to encourage him to be more proactive and outspoken.
Obviously, that must be it. And he knew his students. Yeah. But he knew, Vivekananda, he had a special interest in. And as I said earlier, I think Vivekananda was very disorientated by his first experience with Ramakrishna, where he, I think, touched him. Because he was Ramakrishna is portrayed anyway. I'm sure he wasn't a simple person at all. He wouldn't be a very brilliant person. But he comes over as not educated particularly and so forth, but having these falling in and out of samadhi, it seems, and treating different students differently at different times and giving these incredible teachings and parables and so on. Whereas Vivekananda obviously had a role to play that Ramakrishna could see, and obviously the karma to do it. And so he virtually sent him off on his way, and he did it. He didn't actually promote Ramakrishna particularly. He decided to go with teachings, and that was his idea, to focus on particular types of teaching and teach the yogas, and particularly the 4 yogas: Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Yoga of Devotion, and Gnana Yoga, Yoga of Wisdom.
Well, I think one interesting thing about how he went out was, especially in that first speech that he gave, I think what really took people off guard was that he was so all-inclusive in his message. And they were expecting, I think, probably someone to come and like vehemently defend Hinduism in this Parliament of World religions. And he's come there and he's sort of embraced the religions of the world, talking about the many different parts of the God and how we would respect the essential truth within them.
Yeah.
I think that's a very Ramakrishna message, actually.
I think it is, yeah, and he did it very successfully.
We have in Vivekananda this great example of speaking the truth, of the courage necessary to do that.
Yeah.
And the inspiration we can take from that in our own everyday life. I think as someone who's on the spiritual path, unashamedly.
Yeah.
Not just because but not for the sake of ego, but for the awakening of humanity as a whole. Not just to be heard, but for the sake of that mission and that greater purpose that we can also.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, Spiritual Freedom Show family, thanks for tuning into the show. Just a couple of thoughts I thought I'd leave you with from the episode today. First of all, as Richard says, the intellect is an incredibly valuable tool, but it needs to be directed by the higher self. And that's actually one of the biggest problems we have in the world today, is that the vast majority of people are not doing that. There's also the value of discernment in cutting through the cacophony of false information that faces every new seeker on the spiritual path. And last but not least is the power of standing by your spiritual beliefs, even to be willing to be seen, to be willing to be judged for them, because based on your intuition and your experience, that they are true. And you may not realize that, but even that much is changing the world. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about Swami Vivekananda and the power of directing your intellect with your own higher self, we have more episodes every fortnight exploring the timeless example these spiritual giants do. Subscribe and follow us for more. If you're interested in more right now, I recommend you check out this video over here about awakening your inner voice for greater peace, for greater clarity, and greater purpose in your life. Thanks for tuning into the show. See you next time.